Hello, 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 good people of YouTube. Welcome to another part for Sex in the Spiritual Path, book by Dr. Herbert Puryear, based on the Edgar Cayce readings regarding the role of sex and sexual energy, creative forces in one's spiritual path. So welcome to Guru Grit. My name is Monika, and this kicks off part number 4. So if you haven't watched parts 1 through 3, I encourage you to go do that. At least I think it's part number 4. I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. This is really where we get into some of the more mechanical things to do with sex, sex and relationships, and as well as a lot to do with our bodies. So we covered body is the temple, mind is the builder. And I think it's just a very dense book. Like, it's not easy to flip through and read. So I think I'll put it up for sale after, because I've clearly made sufficient notes here, and I'll go on to make some more. But I just find these books are not very easy to find, so when you find them, I want to keep them in circulation, though one page did suffer a bit of a mishap. I do have it, so I'll just tape it back in there, and it does have a bit of highlighting in it. But in any case, I want to keep the information flowing through the world, which is why I'm making a series. We're also doing Edgar Cayce health remedies. We have a few videos up on hair loss, balding. We've got a video on the importance of castor oil packs, acne, and the next ones we're going to do are going to be for hemorrhoids and hypothyroidism, and then the one after that is going to be hormonal imbalances. So a lot of things affecting women. I'm going to dedicate just one video to that because I've had a lot of questions here and there about just everything to do with the pelvic floor, spotting, ovulation. So I'm just going to make it into one big video, but so many things are not in the actual books, so I'm just sifting through the archives. I'm doing it as fast as I can, so just bear with me. Now let's get into this part about sex. So just to recap, and he meant this was the chakras, but just to recap, the purpose of sex is to create. So quite literally, it's the two loving people coming together to create a physical vessel for a soul. So there's like souls clamoring, waiting to come in here, and you and your partner come together very mindfully, and you create life. If you're not interested in creating life, then it's to flow love to another. So you love them. So the emphasis is always placed upon your willingness to flow love to the other. This comes up over and over again. It's not to get love from them, it's to give your love to them. And in the being in the constant sort of feel of the being a giver of love, you're meant to attract someone who wants to give their love to you. And the only way to really do this, as described in these readings, is to be really focused on the self and total self-improvement, self-upliftment, self-development, all of that. So you can't like sit someone down and tell them, love me how I want, or else there's going to be consequences. It's like, okay, and then you leave that relationship. So you go to the next relationship and that person's much the same. So you have to change that inside yourself. And Abraham Hicks talks a lot about this. So feel free to listen to their work. I've covered their first book, A New Beginning, here, but if you just look up them by name, Abraham-Hicks, you'll find so much free material on YouTube. I really recommend it. So let's get into it. So that's the purpose of sex. So the purpose of sex is to use your creative forces, okay, if you don't want to have sex. And he actually mentions in the book over and over again what's been known for thousands of years by sages and the very, very spiritual, which is when a person is really, really attuned with divine forces, and when they balance their physical chakra system, they lose the desire to sex. So the hypersexed kind of have a lot more to learn. And sometimes people are kind of born with a monkhood vibration, meaning that through their previous lifetimes, they've known this, whether they've been taught it or they just kind of figured it out. They lose interest in that. They become much more feeling or cerebral and less physical. That's not to say that's like to shame anybody. It's not what it means. He does say in the book as well that from time to time you're going to have natural urges. You have to find some proportionate way in satisfying them. And he doesn't really make a distinction between sexual intercourse with another person or masturbation. He just says you have to curb the tendency regardless, because you're sort of like wasting life force energy when it's creative force. So you have to put it towards something. You have to like be creative, do flower making, write a book, get into fixing cars, whatever the case may be. And he's pretty adamant about that. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But in any case, that's how he says it. And the reason is that a woman came to him and says, I've been meditating, like you said, she says, I'm moving my kundalini, I'm moving it. So what's happening, he says, you can move it up your body, but if it doesn't stay there, you haven't really learned anything. Once you move it up and it stays there, you wouldn't have much of an instinct. You've kind of like moved up to living from more of your chakras, you're much more balanced. So if you're living from just the top, it's not that great. If you're living from just the bottom, it's not that great. You've got to activate them all. So I just want to make that very clear, because so much of the time people think, oh, but my crown chakra is so open and I'm so divine. It's like, you've got to have it all, you know, and it's not a competition. It's not ego driven. It's not to put anybody down. You're really in a race with yourself. That's the only thing. Okay. So birth control, this one's quite interesting. The mention of birth control. So firstly, it is highly discouraged and not advisable to be on any kind of chemical birth control, but also non-chemical birth control that will disrupt the endocrine system. So sometimes people get, is it IUDs or like the coil, and they'll say, oh, it's non-hormonal, but what it does is it rigs your the flow of your hormones. And so they say never to do this, because what it does is it tampers with the spiritual centers of your body, which means your chakras, which means it blocks the flow of energy. So it blocks the flow of your life essence. It blocks your actual manifestations, your desires, whatever. Okay, so it's not to say that everything will go wrong in your life. I don't think that's true, because so many people are on birth control and their lives are seemingly fine, but it's not as you were intended to live. So I suppose the birth control, the language is really coded and old, but it says mechanical methods are preferred. I'll actually write that down. Mechanical methods are preferred, probably just meaning use your imagination, you know, not to receive the seed, or to abstain, or to follow the rhythm method, which is just not to have sex 2 weeks prior to your period. So while you're ovulating, to avoid sex. So have sex in only 1/2 of the month to avoid pregnancy. So, okay. And that's a very like physical answer. I've heard of much more spiritual answers that give actual like spiritual energy exercises to avoid pregnancy. But in any case, that's for another time, because it's not mentioned in the readings. I'm not going to get into it. Abortion. So abortion, actually, Dr. Puryear says abortion is not mentioned in any of the readings, but Dr. Puryear himself puts forth 3 points. So this is the author's input. This isn't from Edgar Cayce. This isn't from me either. Dr. Puryear says, firstly, he recites a case where an unwed mother has come to Edgar Cayce and she didn't know what to do. She was pregnant, and he advised her to keep that child, to allow that soul to come into the world, something probably to do with a soul agreement or whatever. It was all part of the plan. Secondly is the continuous and constant never-ending expression of the importance and the reverence of human life. So this too, I'm not going to get into it, because it really depends how you look at it spiritually, like what constitutes a life, I suppose. And then the reason I also want to just, actually I'll mention in this point, but that's 2. And then 3, he gives the example of the prohibition of alcohol. So he says that Edgar Cayce used to say, you know, look at the prohibition of alcohol. Everybody had, you know, everybody was smuggling booze, making booze, moonshine, had all these like secret little passageways and clubs and bars. So basically he says you cannot regulate goodness. Not my words, the words of the author. Basically saying that the more you try to suppress something, human beings will just find another way. And this is actually really true, because Mother Teresa even used to speak about this, and Abraham Hicks talk about this. They say never support anti-crime. Never be anti-drugs, never be anti-war. You literally make more of that thing. So Mother Teresa says, I would never go to an anti-war protest, but I would happily walk in a pro-peace protest. You have to be for something. When you're against something, you literally make more of it. So if you're against abortion and you try to regulate it through the law, through policy, closing down medical centers, people will resort to dangerous measures. And that's no better, because if something happens to the mother and she becomes sickly or poorly, or in extreme cases, if she passes away, you've just negated your own purpose, which was just to allow a human life to come into the world. You've taken a human life out of the world. So he's not actually anti-abortion on a policy level. Like, he never actually says, don't have abortion clinics, don't let doctors learn how to do this, because if you don't, people will resort to other means, and the consequences will be much more negative. So in a sense, that makes sense. You should just let people have the option. Let people have the option. I think that's just a sensible thing to do. Okay. in terms of pregnant sex, I want to mention, he does mention, I should highlight that, stern instructions are given. So a woman asks, actually, I quite like this page. I even put it down. I have it tabbed here, 157 sheet. The question 40 from reading 457-9. Does intercourse while carrying child interfere with the physical or spiritual development of the child? Answer, after 3 months, yes. So stern instructions are given in the readings that pregnant sex is not okay according to the Akashic records. And the reason being that, now, I said I would mention at this part, I don't remember the full name of the channel, but there is a YouTube channel that most people on the spiritual circuit are familiar with. It's, I believe, an elderly German gentleman by the name, I think his name is Wilhelm, and he has like a whiteboard and he doodles answers to spiritual questions. And one of them was to do with pregnancy and abortion. So this is what like ties in well with this, is he says that, you know, the first 3 months, it's just like a blooming little fetus. But then after that, the soul, the imprint kind of comes to say hello every once and again to its future home. So it kind of blends with the vibration of the mother a little bit. So maybe this is why, this is my little hypothesis or theory, maybe this is why Edgar Cayce is saying, okay, after the first trimester, no sex, you must think of it as like a sacred state where you're housing another soul. So if you have intercourse in the second and third trimester, it can do something too much with too many souls occupying this one body and too much energy blending. But there's I haven't been able to find any kind of like concrete description as to why. But then again, these readings were done in like the 30s. They weren't really going to get into details anyways. They're pretty demure, you know? So, I mean, that's the only thing I can think of, plus other things that I've heard. That being said, though, I have to say, he constantly reiterates, like, these things are not meant to make you feel bad, and they're not sins, you know, they're just not preferred, okay? So if you can help it, then help it, because it makes the flow of energy in your life a lot easier, all right? So do what thou wilt. Okay, relationship building, strained marriage, and preferred relationship structure. So this was a really interesting one because I suppose I'm a latecomer to TikTok. I came to TikTok like, well, about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, and then I deleted it for a while and then came back. But I was so surprised to find that so many younger people are talking about things such as going back to being more traditional or something like that. Because when I was growing up, and I mean shoved, like railed down your throat, was like, you're a woman, career is everything. If you don't prioritize your career, if you want to fall in love and get married, you're a loser. Like you don't respect yourself, you don't love yourself, you don't have confidence, like you don't need anyone. And I was always like, but I want to be happy in all things. And the only reason I want to be successful is to have someone to share it with, you know? And they'd be like, ew, you know, it's needy, it's this, it's that. And it made me laugh. So now to see this younger generation kind of going back to thinking like, not going back to traditional things, but just saying, don't tell me what to think. Like, I think for myself. It's very, very refreshing because according to the readings, there really is something for everyone. So there is not a one size fits all formula, but there is a majority, and the majority is going to be marriage and it's going to be monogamy. So here we go. What is so important about relationships? So what is so important about marriage and having a home? So the reason he says it's so important is that the home is the dwelling place with the creative forces. So it's like a home with a family is the reflection of the creative forces, which is like the heavens or God, okay? You have a system of people cooperating together, flowing love to one another, and they feel safe in the world, they feel protected, they feel provided. People are going to say, that wasn't my experience, right? And you learn something from it, and now you get to have a crack at like creating that for yourself or passing on that legacy to your children. So marriage is the essential relationship for the maintenance of the home structure, and this is so important, sexual expression is to be an outcome of, but not the purpose of marriage. So in this case, what I really want to do is take some pressure off of people who will always say something like, oh, are you from this state or from that place? We all know, like, people there get married really young because they're really religious and they like really want to do it. They'll be engaged for like 2 weeks or 3 months and they get to it. So he says this is not cool. You cannot get married for the purpose of sex. Okay, it's the result of the love you feel for that person. You don't rush to get married so that you can have sex, so then you can feel the love for that person, okay? And this is not limited to age, all right? There's 57-year-olds, 68-year-olds, 48-year-olds coming to see him with problems in their sex life with their spouse. And this is one of the things he says, it's like, just because you're married doesn't mean you're automatically going to enjoy each other's company, doesn't mean you're automatically going to enjoy this as this. It's like, why did you get married? And so his remedy for everything is you must be happy in yourself, okay? So, and I mean, the reason I say all of that is to say, I know, I've spoken to people who did get married thinking, okay, well, they were secular and everything, but they said, well, I was just ready and it was kind of time, and I was looking forward to having a companion. I was like 29. I wanted consistent affection, constant access to intimacy and sex and all those things. And he's saying, you can't do that. That is not a pure thought process, because he says over and over, you wouldn't want it done to you. You wouldn't want someone to shrug and say, I guess you'll do, and like marry you. You have to have that narrative and discourse with yourself. And when you realize what you're wanting, you find someone who's wanting the same, and you flow your love easily towards one another. So that's why I wanted to say, don't just think that like religious people do this. People do this because it's human. We're a social mammal. And he's saying you have to awaken from that and you have to do a little better. So marriage strained. This is the most, and he actually comes in, it comes italicized. He says, minimize faults, magnify virtues. I've read several cases where this question was very common. My partner does this, my partner does that, really, really bugs me. What can I do? What can I do? And he says, most people that come to him focus on what they don't like about their partner rather than what they do. So here I have to give an Abraham Hicks analogy where they say this is the most common thing for most relationships. And they say most people are in a relationship they don't even want to be in, if you really think about it. And they say if there are 10 things in your life and 9 of them are going wrong and 1 of them is going right, if you really poured your focus into the one thing that's going right in your life, the other 9 would have to rise to meet it, and then you'd have 10 things going right in your life. But if 9 things are going well in your life and 1 thing is going wrong, and you only focus on the thing going wrong, you're going to tank the other 9. So all 10 things are going wrong in your life. So, and these channelings were done 35, 36 years before Abraham started writing books. So it's the same. The energetic principle is the same. If there's strain in your marriage, you have to learn to train yourself to focus positively, okay? If you're with someone who's absolutely unbearable to you, you must focus on the nuggets of pleasure or joy you get out of your day every day, whether it's a glass of water or a coffee, or that your mom called, or that you saw a bird that you like. Okay, you just have to train it like a muscle, and then eventually everything will rise to meet it. Now, this one's a really important one. Husband not living the spiritual path as his wife. And this is really good relationship advice, because Abraham says the same thing. They say, the way that you get happy in a relationship is to focus on what you're doing. And in terms of spiritual people, I found the spiritual people are quite like this. We're all so keen on being accepting of everyone so long as they think like you. You can't do that. You can't say, oh, I found someone really open-minded. I'm going to teach them Reiki and astrology and being vegan. And if they don't want to live like me, they're gone. It's like, no. You must accept people. And so he says, he tells the woman, you have to live your truth, and only by living you lead by example. You never influence another by force, and this includes conversation, and you have to mind your business, okay? So it's the same advice as Abraham, and he writes, not so much by talking, but by living the truth will her husband then see, like, hey, how come she's happy all the time? Oh, because she doesn't really complain. Or how come these things are going well for her? It's like, oh, because maybe she doesn't talk about her goals to other people. And maybe the husband will realize, why is she so happy when I'm at work? And he's like, oh my God, it's because I'm not here. Oh my God, it's me, because we don't have shared interests. We don't have shared things in common. But another one is shared interests. He does mention a remedy for relationships is to find something that the couple is interested in together. Okay, so you can have separate hobbies, separate lives, but there must be a few things you like to do together, because he says in most cases, people that are too involved in themselves individually in this way, they do tend to drift apart. So you have to kind of like, and be playful, whether it doesn't matter if it's a board game or golfing, going to the driving range, baking something every Sunday. It can be small, but you both are pouring your focus into it. You're blending your energies and reminding one another you're home to each other, okay? Now, monogamy and alternative relationships. Monogamy is encouraged for most, but rather He doesn't say like, this is the right way and the only way. He says, no, it is the spiritual intent of that person, because your soul could have expanded in whatever previous incarnations, that in this one, I don't know, maybe it's not for you. Or maybe your soul hasn't expanded, so you're not ready for monogamy. As we know, like, lifelong relationships take a lot of work, you know? I'm not saying it's hard, but it is an effort. So he says, well, it just depends on the individual. If your intent is to flow love freely and be loving, then it's like the way that you do it in is really secondary or tertiary to that. It's just so like human to try to limit or define it somehow and be like, I'm a this and you're that. And it's like, oh, no, hold on. If you're here to love and spread goodwill, that's top. Okay, that's the most important thing. So anyways, a spiritual intent of the couple or person rather than the definition of the relationship, which defines its essence and whether it is appropriate for that specific person. Okay, so the essence of your intention is the most important thing. Everything else is secondary. But monogamy is the preferred default for most. This is, he says, is true. And so marriage is advisable, is the most advisable form of relationship, and it is actually deemed necessary in many readings. So on a societal level, marriage clearly has value. There's something to, and he actually even specifies like family units. So it's something to do with like marriage and family, what we consider traditional now, what we call it traditional. But he says basically for a person to have like a base, for you to have a base to retire to at the end of the day, to wake up with, it keeps you grounded, it keeps you understanding. And the reason is that I know a lot of times people think it's oppressive and this and that, or they find something else more freeing or liberating. But if you do not choose something and let your decision be your decision and see your decision through, then what the readings say, according to Edgar Cayce, is that your soul then does not develop. Because if you're always looking for the easy thing or the exciting thing, you're not going to get there in this life. And all you really do is you shift the burden onto a future incarnation. So just tough it out, you know? So it doesn't mean to stay there if you're unhappy. Oh, come on, please exercise sense. You don't stay there if you're being beaten to a pulp. Like, come on, you know, but you cannot use like a petty thing such as, I'm bored. It's like, well, get a hobby. I don't know, you know, but there's things that are obviously going to be recommended, like abuse and so forth. Okay, we have to save ourselves. So there's an emphasis on home stability, as I said. Now, let's do the big one. Actually, I didn't put it in the notes because I was too excited to record, but this would fall under this branch of marriage. He says the most, and this is what I was mentioning TikTok earlier, there seems to be this whole thing with like younger people that was, I'm just surprised because it was never around when I was growing up that, you know, women are like, no, I don't want to work. I want to stay home. I love homemaking. Like, I love homemaking. You know, I love cooking. I cook every day. If you come to the lives and stuff, you know how much I like love home life. But it just wasn't really like socially acceptable somehow when I was growing up. So these days it's like what people really want. And there's a lot of those people coming out now who are talking about like, I don't even know what to call it, but they're like feminine energy coaches or whatnot. I'm not sure how they brand themselves, but it's not entirely factual, but according to him, there's some element to that sort of makes sense. So there's something to do with having one person in a relationship. And I have to make this really clear. In the readings, he does give an example where it's not bound to gender norms and sex. Okay, so it's the soul. So let's say one partner of a male couple, okay, has the energy of like a warrior archetype or like a go-getter and an earner, and the other one is interested in the sustaining of life. So they want to have a beautiful getaway or oasis in their home. The home is a spiritual retreat and it's not to be undermined. Everything starts from the home. The home base is everything. That couple can spiritually develop in a great way because everybody has a role, and I don't mean it's gender defined, it's like spirit defined. And maybe you're saying, Monika, that's a cop out, that's like a loophole, you're trying to like romanticize this, is trying to like box people in. No, because this is ancient and it precedes everything. It precedes everything I was taught in university, you know. And it's the energy. It's the actual energy. So there was one case in the readings where a man had come to him and he said to him, "No, your energy is the energy of someone that beautifies the world and that sustains life. It would be better for you to remain home." Okay, and this was almost 100 years ago now, so you can imagine that this has always been the case. Okay, it's down to the individual, but for the most part, he really does say the best thing for the person who's more interested in like the flow of life, the feminine energy, the receiving energy, the beautifying energy, to marry someone who is like not I'm not quoting this obviously verbatim. This is just the thing. Okay, it's very traditional in that the man is the earner and the provider, and the woman takes that money and makes the home a beautiful place. I believe, I forget the wording used. It was really sweet. It was something like the home should be like a retreat or a paradise. So at the end of the day, after being out working, the man comes back, he can, you know, recuperate, and the woman can take those earnings and go and refresh herself, do what she likes, enjoy her life. So like everybody wins, but there has to be this symbiosis. Okay, you have to be, I'm not getting into any kind of argument and whatever. I went to university for these things, so I'm just like, at the end of the day, if you try to intellectualize it, you'll never win. You have to feel it. Okay, you have to understand where this comes from and why. We are all you know, we're all different and the same. We have to express ourselves. So if you go against the expression that you crave, you will not be happy. And that's not to say that like everybody has to fit in somewhere. Like I've said this before, but my energy is uncommonly masculine. Most of my incarnations, I've been a man. And I even knew when I was young, like as a child, I knew I did something terrible to women. And that's why I was made a woman. And I knew even before I hit puberty, I just knew it was going to be a rough ride for me. So I've met my karma many times. So I thought, okay, so how do I then integrate that in myself now as an adult woman? How do I have all the feminine things I really enjoy, but still do the things that really feed me? You know, like I love to try new things. I love to be entrepreneurial. I love to take risks, you know, and get out there. So you have to integrate that in your soul. So you will know what's right for you. But on the whole, he says it's best if one person is hyperactive in the world in terms of like a fighter, so like getting money, and the other person takes that resource and makes it bloom. Okay. Next, divorce. Dun dun dun. What do we do about divorce? Okay, once again, there's no real sin, is there? And you start where you are. So most of the readings, he says that divorce is not encouraged because the relationship can be remedied. Okay, so when the couples, he will also receive couples coming to him. Actually, he had a couple come to him where he encouraged them to get divorced. He said it was a 24-year-old woman and a 35-year-old man, and they were trying to like work out and stay together, and he just said it's just recommended that you divorce. And the reason is, he says people who marry without working on their individual selves will oftentimes then end up in relationships that don't serve them or their partner, and their souls do not develop. So this is the thing. Earth is like a school, like Dolores Cannon talks about that a lot. Like it's like a classroom. You've come here to learn. If you don't learn, if you don't do what you're meant to be doing, it's actually what you wanted. Like no one's forcing you. Do you know what I mean? You signed up for it. You're not getting real use out of it, right? Like if you paid money for something, you would expect to get your money's worth. You wouldn't go to Starbucks, flick a tenner on the counter and just walk out and not get your order or whatever, right? You'd want your coffee. So in this sense, he tells couples, and this is the interesting wording that he uses. Where's glorify? Here we go. When self-indulgence is sought, and I believe once you get to my age, you would have had at least one relationship like this. When self-indulgence is sought by one partner and glorifying of the spirit by another, then separation is encouraged. So when one partner, let's use a really typical example. Let's say a man and woman get together and they're very, very happy in the beginning. And then after a few months, you realize the woman is like, all I really want to do is love you and be good to you. And I'm doing like everything for this person. I do everything for this person. And the man is like, right, and we have to stay together, and I'll only be good enough that you don't leave me, but really, I'm not here to flow divine love to you. I'm here because you're good looking and you make me look good. Now let's flip it. Hey, you know, I'm only going to be good enough to you so you don't leave me, but really, you materially support me or you make me look good, so I'm not gonna leave you, but man, you've got to stick around because you keep the wheels turning and the dude's like, hey, what am I getting out of this? I'm like madly in love with you, you don't really care, you're this is that. Okay, so whichever way you flip it. And again, it's not gender specific, but it's like when one person is interested in glorifying of the spirit, as in like, I'm here to evolve, I'm here to flow my love, I'm here to be selfless and just completely unselfish and love fully, I'm open, I'm vulnerable, but the other person is not. They're like, hey, I'm getting a great deal out of this. This is great. This is awesome. And what's more is because you're so like into spirituality, you're never going to fight me on this. Really. You're never going to rob me of your love. You're always going to be forgiving. You're always going to be the one to keep sweet and make everything nice. I'm just going to keep being a turd, you know? Then it's encouraged the couple separate because the soul that came to get what it wants to grow is not getting it in that relationship. It's being challenged, but not in a good way. Okay. This is like very upsetting. And then the other soul that's only interested in self-indulgence is also not evolving because it's with someone that's just enabling it. So then it's recommended the couple split. But for the most part, divorce is not encouraged in many cases to allow the souls to complete their learning because you complete your learning by staying together most of the time and working through things. In some of the readings, a few instances, it was strongly encouraged that the couple should part for their individual expansion. So basically, whether you stay married or not, the reason you're advised to stay married or not is for your individual expansion. That it really depends on the person that you've picked. So here he's saying, hey, sometimes people pick someone else. If they leave them, they'll actually grow more. But if this couple was to stay, then they will grow more. So growth is like the name of the game. You've got to like grow, right? And it doesn't have to be painful, but you've got to learn, you've got to grow. So when in doubt, always default to self-improvement. I'll put an exclamation point there because he emphasizes this so much, so much. He says, if you're not sure if you should stay married or not, develop the self. Work on yourself, you know, ask yourself what triggers you, what makes you feel this, that, the other. And once you start getting into that mental pattern of empowerment, then your relationship kind of has no choice but to raise in vibration and join you up here, or it will just disintegrate and fall out of your life and someone else will come in that helps along with that. So now I'm really excited for the next few chapters. They're going to focus on, chapters, more like parts, but there's more to do. This part really, really interests me. It's called Sexy for Seduction or for service. So seduction is really important because, you know, everybody's talking about that book. I mean, I love Robert Greene. I've read his books, The 48 Laws of Power, Laws of Seduction. I particularly love that one. And then there's like How to Win Friends and Influence People. I mean, I'm really into Napoleon Hill, the Tony Robbinses and all that stuff. So it's basically going to be intent focused again. There's a part on free will, so much context of choices and decisions that we have. What about grace? What about power plays and things like that? And then we'll wrap it up and we'll move on to the next one. We've got the Edgar Cayce primer. I actually secured 3 more Edgar Cayce books just yesterday. I had a particularly, you know, good day, so that's really good. So I've got, yeah, the Edgar Cayce, The Channeling of Your Higher Self is very, very popular. Here's the Edgar Cayce primer, which is the same author as Sex and Spiritual Path, Dr. Herbert Puryear. Discovering the Path to Self-Transformation, so that's quite good. And here we are. The Sleeping Prophet, The Life, the Prophecies, and the Readings of America's Most Famous Psychic by Just Stern. So I'm very, very excited. So now that rounds us up to 11 Edgar Cayce books, and as and when I finish them, I will part with my little library. So thank you so much for watching and being here. Thank you for supporting me on Patreon and PayPal and writing to me. I enjoy our co-creations. And until next time, just remember what Edgar Cayce says is you can do no wrong except the thought that you've done something wrong. So go forth and live your happiest life ever. Have a beautiful weekend. I love you all so much. Bye-bye for now.